I have had so many people in my comments ask me, are you a witch? I want to get into crystals, but not if it makes me a witch. This stuff looks amazing, but is it witchcraft? For a long time, I wondered, why is that such a bad thing? I mean, based on what a witch actually is, I guess I did fall into that category, but I never wanted to use the word. Why? I've always understood that anything other than the norm could be considered a little witchy, like using alternative healing methods, using herbal remedies instead of over-the-counter medicines, using essential oils, using crystals. Anything that's seen as holistic could also be seen as witchy. So most of us in 2021, especially those people who are very interested in spirituality, are a little bit witchy. The past year or so, I have felt a pull to connect with nature, to rediscover what it means to be alive and be human, but now in this modern digital world. It can feel so heavy and dense, and to me, it feels like my life is flying by, being wasted when I'm on the computer all day, on my phone all night, eating, sleeping, going to the bathroom, and then doing it all again. I know I'm not the only one who has this itch, this craving to experience something else, but not really knowing what that even is. If you saw my last video, you probably remember that I mentioned I'm going to witch school. That's what's happening. It's an online school taught by a practicing witch named Mia Magic, who I stumbled across on Instagram. One of the very first things we explore in the first lesson is what a witch wound is. I felt so connected to this topic because it's something that I really struggle with. Through the course, I can see a lot of other people struggle with it, and based on my comments, I know a lot of you guys also struggle with it. What is it that we fear so much about using the word witch? So I wanted to do more research to see where this wound really comes from, why there's such a stigma and fear around the word witch, and why some people are choosing to reclaim it today in 2021. I do want to preface that I am not a historian, I am not an expert in religious studies. This is just what I found through research. This is just meant to discuss where the fear of the word witch comes from, and though I do discuss conversion into Christianity in this video because it is a huge part of this story, I am in no way trying to hurt or disrespect anybody based on any of their religions. Trust me, I know that everybody's beliefs are so sacred to them and I would never want to hurt anybody. I don't share any of my opinions on any religion in this video. So with that said, let's get into it. If you Google the word witch, you will see the definition as a woman thought to have magical powers, especially evil ones, popularly depicted as wearing a black cloak, a pointed hat, and flying on a broomstick. For thousands of years before the spread of Christianity, a witch was honored. They were a seer, a knower, a wise person who connected with nature, who knew how to be one with the healing properties of the earth and shared their knowledge with their community. The most famous case of witch hunts we hear is about the Salem witch trials. However, witch hunts had been going on long before that. So before Christianity had spread to Europe or had even really started in general, it was home to many different religions, most of which were polytheistic aside from Judaism. And these ancient religions were commonly called paganism. During the Roman Empire in the age of Theodosius, between 379 to 395, paganism was suppressed and nearly completely wiped out. Remember, the majority of Europe held pagan beliefs at this time, so Christianity had a big challenge to do to try to convert all of Europe. The entire infrastructure of pagan worship was eliminated within a few years in the eastern half of Europe. Pagan holidays were no longer recognized, statues were destroyed, they had to stop all of their practices immediately. Paganism had deep roots and had been built up over thousands of years. Some pagans did not convert and they just chose to practice in private, and their knowledge and wisdom was passed down to their future generations. But essentially all records and knowledge of these ancient practices had been destroyed. Before we get into like the witch hunts and everything, we need to talk about what pagans actually believed because there's such a misconception over that, and that's where the fear of the word witch really comes from. So pagans, they were polytheistic. They believed in many gods and goddesses. They believed that the earth was its own living, breathing entity, a goddess in itself. They believed in government gods, family gods, gods of the forest, mountains, streams, oceans, all the waters, the farmland, and all of these gods were believed to be active participants in everyday human life. People would worship these gods because they believed if the gods were happy and pleased, that their livestock would reproduce, that their farmland would be flourishing. They would bring rain and protect against storms, ward off disease and bring the sick back to health, and protect their military troops in battle. It's also important to know that pagans were not afraid of death. They were not afraid of the afterlife. They understood that it was a natural part of life, and that because they lived so in sync with nature, they just weren't afraid of what was next. Most religions at this time did not believe in eternal damnation or eternal salvation. There was no concept of heaven or hell. So the idea of pagans worshiping the devil is just not true, because they didn't even believe that that existed. That wasn't a part of their belief system. When Christianity was starting to spread across Europe, one of the ways that they converted people was saying that they needed this salvation. Unlike pagans, Christians believed that there was only one God, and that anybody who didn't believe and worship him would then live in eternal damnation. So this method of converting people to Christianity really worked because it scared people. Who would want to live in eternal damnation? Once converted, everybody who was polytheistic had to give up all of their other gods in order to be Christian and believe in this one God. Pagans didn't really understand that, because to them they had so many gods that if they were to pray to Zeus one day, they could, pray to Athena the next, and Zeus would still be there. It wasn't like they had to give him up completely. So this concept was really hard for them to understand, and they didn't really like it. Another strategy of this Christian conversion across Europe was how they tangled Christian holidays and pagan traditions together. According to Christianity.com, when trying to convert people from the pagan religion to Christianity, they noticed some pushback when it came to certain traditions and holidays. So they tried to compromise and give them the best of both worlds. And there's a lot more to this that I'm just not going to get into, because I don't want to go too deep into religion. It's so sacred to everybody. So if you are interested in this topic, I'm going to leave the links that I'm using in the description below so you can read for yourself and learn a little bit more. So from the age of Theodosius or Theodosius to the 1400s, the understanding of the human connection to nature had slowly died out over the 1,000 years, as what was left of its traditions had completely merged with Christianity. So as time went on and Christianity became more of a prominent religion in the world, they began to see the remaining pagans as witches because they were not converted. That meant they weren't going to heaven, which then meant to the Christians that they were then worshiping the devil. So now that we have a very, very basic understanding, now we can talk a little bit more about the witch hunts. So during the Black Plague, as we know, it was such widespread devastation. It was only natural for people to point the finger at somebody else as to why this had happened to them. And unfortunately, minorities at the time were blamed for the Black Plague. Jewish people and alleged witches were tortured and burned to death for supposedly causing the Black Plague. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII, ironic, and two of his clergymen published an influential book called Malleus Maleficarum, or The Hammer of Witches. And this was a legal document talking about how to persecute a witch. All wickedness is but little to the wickedness of a woman. What else is a woman but a foe to friendship, an inescapable punishment, a necessary evil? Women are by nature instruments of Satan. I mean, need I say more? This document encouraged the hunting, the torturing, and the execution of alleged women. Alleged witches, aka women who were living their lives the way they wanted to. Whether they were practicing old religions like paganism, or they were herbalists, or they were midwives, or they were just a little bit more introverted than the average person, or they just didn't adhere to societal norms, they were an alleged witch. Many scholars argue that it was women who seemed most independent from patriarchal norms. A lot of these women who were killed for witchcraft were over 50, women who had never given birth, never were married, were a little bit more introverted. Anything that was seen outside of normal was very suspicious. The start of the witch hunts in the Holy Roman Empire began around 1609. The war between Roman Catholics and Protestants left many people killed. Territories were demolished, bad weather was going on, leaving famine, crop failure, and an outbreak of the plague once again. Now, witches and the devil were blamed for this pain and suffering that was going on in the world at the time, and this is what sparked the witch hunts. The standard procedure in most countries was for accused witches to be brought before a court and were interrogated and tortured until they either confessed to stop the torture or gave up another woman's name. The exact number of European executions on charges of witchcraft is not certain, but it's estimated to be hundreds of thousands of people, specifically women. During my research, I found a quote from a Boston University professor, Stephen Katz, and his perspective on it really made me think a little bit differently about this whole thing. He said that the witch craze was inseparable from the stigmatization of women and that the witch hunts can be viewed as a case of genderized mass murder. Since doing this research, it's really opened my eyes that this was just a way to kill women and to scare people to staying in line. And I'm not about it. How does this witch wound show up in today's society? It can also be called a persecution wound because this is not just a trauma that is unique to paganism. Obviously, this has happened to Jewish people. This has happened to many other religions in the world. This has happened to Native Americans. This has happened so many times over and over again. There is so much wounding in religion, and these events have caused a massive trauma to our collective. As the patriarchy has risen, we have seen how threatened they are by anybody who has more power than them. Anybody that strays out of line is seen as a threat, and they will do anything to get them out of the picture. We see the sister wound showing up very strongly in today's society. During these witch persecutions, women were not safe. Anybody could give up somebody's name at any time to stop their torture, to then give torture to another woman. So it was not safe to have a mother, a sister, a friend, a neighbor, an aunt. Nobody could know what you were doing behind closed doors. And if they thought you were doing something weird, they would give your name. So this shows itself in today's society by women hating other women, not trusting other women, and this was not an issue we used to have. Also, most people are naturally afraid to be different, to stand out, to share what makes them unique, to get on stage and voice their opinion and make change in the world. That's very few people have the courage to do that. And it's because of this persecution wound, this witch wound. Because it wasn't safe to share what you believe. That wasn't what the patriarchal society saw as standing in line. This has left a massive imprint on our collective psyche that has greatly wounded our wisdom. That wound is prominent in our DNA, and we are all subconsciously afraid of what has happened before, time and time again. Though this persecution witch wound is a memory of the subconscious, it keeps so many of us in these spiritual closets and being honest about what we care about, what we love, and what's important to us. We all want to follow our own path, and if we feel we're being held back or that we aren't allowed to fully be ourselves, not even relating to just your beliefs, but having to be secretive about anything that we love, we feel stifled. We feel like we aren't really free, like we have to walk on eggshells just to be who we are. This is the witch wound. This is the persecution wound. This wound lives very heavily in our collective unconscious, in the memory of our souls. Remember, this has happened in everyone's bloodline. At some point, no matter where your ancestors come from in the world, this, I'm sure, has happened in your bloodline at some point. And this fear can really affect us in many different ways that we aren't even consciously aware of. Witch does not mean evil. It does not mean a mean, nasty old woman. That is a story that unfortunately has come across through the conversion across Europe and pop culture. By living in harmony with nature and honoring the planet, by being compassionate to other people, to animals, to the land you live on, to respect nature as a living, breathing entity rather than taking from it out of fear, greed, and power, there is nothing evil about that, in my opinion. I'm a big proponent of practicing compassion, being a compassionate person, understanding why people believe certain things, learning what makes each person unique, and honoring that in that person without trying to change them. We are all here to be different. No one is meant to be the same. No one's meant to believe the same thing. We are meant to live a true, authentic experience, whatever that means to you. As Mia Magic says, witch just means wise, and to me, witch means just practicing compassion for yourself and all living things, including other humans, and the planet. So are you somebody who holds this witch wound? Are you somebody who feels like you're a witch but are too afraid to say the word? Or are you somebody who hates that word and you're afraid of it in general? How do you think that this witch wound, this persecution wound, is showing up in your life? For me, I feel it every single time I post a video where I talk about spirituality or talk about new agey wellness things. Like, I don't know, it feels like every time I hit publish that I'm about to die of fear. What's also really interesting is that I've always had a huge fear of being charged with a crime that I did not commit. And after doing this research, it's a little bit more interesting to me. Maybe there's a real reason for that. There are so many ways that this witch wound presents itself in our lives. From fearing what other people think of you, to a fear of authority, feeling like a fraud, never trusting others, fearing the patriarchy, fearing stepping outside of your comfort zone, fearing other people's opinions. Like, there are so many ways that this shows up. And even if the word witch still holds a negative connotation to you after hearing all of this information, but you still resonate with what it means and you don't want to use the word, I get it. Trust me, I get it. And I think understanding the fear is just another way to step into our power and not be afraid of it. So if you like this video and you did learn something new, give it a thumbs up. And if you've watched all the way through, you're not subscribed and you like the vibe here, definitely do subscribe. I upload videos on self-discovery and exploring spirituality and different wellness trends. So if that's something that you're into, definitely subscribe. I do not portray myself as an expert in anything. I'm just sharing my journey, what I'm going through, what I'm learning, and sharing it here with you guys so that maybe you can try it out for yourself. You can learn from my mistakes. So if you are in need of a friend along your path, whatever that may be in your life, I would love to be that for you. So I will see you guys very soon with another video. Bye.